Hello from Davos. I'm Rick Kirkland, Director of Publishing at McKinsey, here with Kevin Sneeder, our Global Managing Partner. We've just finished another jam-packed, crazy week. We saw a lot of clients here this year. That's one of the great things about Davos. So many people come. What were you hearing?
Well, this Davos did in many ways stand out. The sheer number of people who were here meant that there was actually a broader set of folk that were here. The business world very much represented. The government world represented in greater numbers than I've previously seen. And of course, the social sector very much a part of the dialogue. So that's the backdrop to answering your question. You have to start with perspectives on the economy, since that always is one of the things people seek to get out of Davos. And in answering what did they think this year, it's worth remembering that the Davos consensus is not always right. In 2019 Davos last year, we were definitely hearing a lot of concern, a real sense this is going to be a tough year. The phrase that sticks out is the notion that we had synchronous growth and people were now talking about synchronous recession. That did not prove to be the case. In many regards, 2019 was a very strong year. You could measure that in different ways. Economic growth turned out to be just fine. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad. Markets in many cases hit all-time highs. I could go on. So as one contemplates and reflects on what I heard this year optimism, pretty universal optimism. I would say that most people feel that the major economies are in solid shape and should have a perfectly fine 2020. That was true of the United States. That was certainly what you heard in discussing Asia and China in particular. I think in Europe, while there may have been some voices of concern around how strong is the continental European economy, nevertheless, overall, people didn't feel we were about to see something that would be worse than 2019. In fact, they were saying it'd probably be as good, if not better. And so when you went around the world, there was just this sense from corporates and governments alike that 2020 should be a perfectly good year. Of course, we can worry about 2021. So that was the Davos consensus there. The second thing that absolutely dominated the agenda, and maybe I should have begun with, was the climate change debate and dialogue. This has arrived, and it was very much taken in the spirit of, okay, we now know there's a real issue. What are we going to do about it? There wasn't a huge amount of debate around the science, yet I know others will have that dialogue. There was a lot of debate around how do we actually make progress. In meetings with the representatives of the finance sector, the big banks, the asset managers, there was an increasing focus on, we, quote, they believe in market mechanisms, yet there is imperfect information around how companies are doing, around how society is doing and making progress or not in tackling emissions. So how do we get a set of standards, a way of thinking about this that allows markets to act efficiently? That was a big part of the dialogue there. For corporates and companies, the real conversation was, we hear you, we've got legacy operations, how do we make sure we really are understanding the nature of our carbon footprint and therefore what we can do about it, because some of it is very situation specific. And in a number of CEOs, the line that stuck in my head was they said, we have been on a journey to prioritize efficiency, cost often, and get efficiency optimized. Now we need to think about resiliency. We need to think about how we can withstand some of these climate impacts that our work and others have detailed. And that was a very different tone of conversation.
I think it may have been you. Someone said to me this week that this is a bit like cyber. 10 years ago, it was kind of a nice to have, and now it's essential. And I think it feels like climate is on that arc.
It's on that arc. I think we're perhaps on that arc, but less clarity around what to do about it, which was the third part. We had the many NGOs represented. Greta Thunberg was here. Others were here too, who were very much looking for action and not all that excited about excuses. Yeah. And so when you put that together, the dialogue, similarly with cyber, was, okay, so what are we actually going to go do? How do we make this transition? We recognize that our parts of the world remain very dependent on thermal coal. So this is a transition. We can't just turn things off overnight. And if that's the case, what's it going to take? I don't think Davos would pretend to have the answers to that. But there was a lot of referencing to the report we had written which said, okay, it is time to go back, look at the footprint you cast, look at the drivers of that footprint, understand the options you've got, take those options and quantify the cost of making progress and also the cost of inactivity, and then make it part of your core business agenda. That was the recipe that we were discussing, that we were engaging with clients alike and non-clients alike. This consensus around that, the question now is how does that move forward?
So there's always a technology discussion. What was the sort of AI was the huge thing last year? Is it still there? And how's it morphed?
It was on the agenda, but less than I think it was last year, clearly, where it was the lead item, which tells you a bit about how attention can move on. I don't feel that climate change will be off the agenda next year, and I think it will have a much higher place in the agenda than AI had this year. There was still clearly a lot of conversation in two directions, AI for good and AI for bad. For good, there was incredible excitement. There was literally presentations and talks around the impact it's having on cancer research, on drug discovery, the impact it's having on improving the lives of citizens, the opportunity it makes to address some of the climate change issues. There's a real role for a connected home, for example. But if I take that connected home, then the other side was the dark side, where people were talking about what does that mean for privacy. Clearly, it can manage efficiency of the energy supply, but what does that mean for the privacy of the family in that home? And so privacy again came to the core, and there was a lot of discussion around that. Plus, we're in an election year in the United States. Of course, people were talking about the influence it has on our democratic approaches. And there was a long conversation also about the way in which it's being used and misused by a number of actors to influence outcomes in the private sector and the public sector. So yes, AI, technology in general, very much on the agenda, but not quite in the same spotlight as in prior years.
One of the things that, again, was in the atmosphere before we got here, Klaus Schwab talked about it, it seemed to be in a lot of the dialogues, was around the role of business in addressing not just climate, but a whole set of broader issues. This purpose debate, the stakeholder versus shareholder. Did you hear that? And was there anything that emerged as significant?
I mean, I think it was overshadowed by the climate debate, but nevertheless, the original headline for Davos was moving from a shareholder to a stakeholder economy. And so a number of the sessions did talk about what are the drivers, why is this urgent? And the urgency stems from climate change, yes, because that clearly is one where business has a role that impacts the non-business world. But it also stems from growing unease with the realities of rising inequality within countries, a real sense that there is a breakdown in trust between business, but not just business, other parts of the economy and private citizens, a real unease around the way in which the globalization has played out in terms of what it's meant for winners versus losers, and a sense that that's just gone in a direction that is no longer able to be one that we can all point to and say is a good thing. So many factors at work, a real conversation around that, but more emphasis on, okay, how do you lead when there are so many different stakeholders? Who are they? What are they? And so I went to a number of sessions where we, frankly, talked a bit about the dialogue we've been having as a firm and the many stakeholders that need to be brought in to the conversation. The other part of it, we contributed a set of thoughts on leadership in the 21st century, where we talked about the kind of questions that business leaders need to ask. What's my mission and purpose? Who am I accountable to, given a broader set of stakeholders? How do we think about the time horizon in which we operate? Is it really as short term as the markets would like, or does it have to be longer term to impact society positively? What are the benefits that ultimately we generate, and who shares in those benefits? How do we think about the way in which global influences and forces dictate how we work locally and impact the local choices that we make? I could go on. We actually had 10 of these questions. And they certainly forced a dialogue around what action do you take to address these kind of topics.
So, Kevin, I know you probably set a new personal record for, I don't know how many meetings you were in and how little sleep you got, but how did you feel like McKinsey again? How was our firm at Davos? Was it strong again? How did you feel it?
It was a far greater number of individual meetings that we had, and that was a deliberate attempt to really take the pulse. What are people saying? What are they hearing? I was very proud of our presence here at Davos. We were definitely at the heart of the agenda, whether it was our climate change report, our thinking on leadership in the 21st century, our work in diversity and inclusion, which I should say was also very much part of the conversation. That is a part of the conversation that continues from year to year, and obviously continues to be one where the progress, whilst happening, isn't as great as we would like. We contributed a lot to that dialogue here in Davos. And it was also, I think, I was proud of the way in which so many people picked up on other topics on which we had commented or written about over the last, let's say, year. So it was a Davos where I do think our firm was very much part of the dialogue, leading and shaping the dialogue in many cases, but also one where I hope we leave with a greater appreciation and understanding of what's on the mind of business, government and NGO leaders, and as a result, with a degree of humility, because I don't think anyone should leave Davos thinking that they've talked to the world and got that whole perspective, because, as I said, the Davos consensus is often wrong, and you can breathe the pure mountain air and breathe your own fumes in doing so. But I also hope, though, we did listen hard, and that we will leave with a greater sense of what's going on and how do we take that and build it into what we do day by day.
Sounds like a good concluding thought. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Rick.